Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. With everything going on in the world right now, conflicts overseas, economic tensions between major powers, and the constant threat of things spiraling even more out of control than they already are, it's no wonder that people are starting to wonder, what would I do if World War III actually happened? This is something that's been coming up a lot on prepper channels, and it's also been on the news for a while now. So it's pretty easy to let it all just kind of turn into white noise. But the fact of the matter is that governments are preparing for this, and they've been ramping those preparations up. And if the people who probably have a lot better intel than we do are taking the threat of a major global conflict seriously, we may want to also, because even if where we live isn't hit directly, it could still have some pretty significant impacts on our lives. Economic fallout, cyber attacks, terror strikes, and even domestic unrest could all happen as a result. So today, we're going to talk about what everyday folks like us can do to prepare for the kinds of long-term chaos that a global conflict could cause. We'll cover things like the gear and supplies that you'll need, how to protect you and your loved ones physically, and how to stay mentally grounded through all of that mess. And one of the first things that we need to talk about when it comes to a major global war is the economic impacts. War is expensive. Even if the fighting's happening on the other side of the world, it still costs us a lot back home through inflation, shortages, and market instability. We've all seen food prices creeping up, fuel prices bouncing around, and certain products disappearing off the shelves, and all that would get a lot worse during a world war. And in that sort of situation, having a solid personal financial plan would be essential. Doing things like eliminating high interest debt from credit cards and other loans will help you be less bogged down if prices continue to rise. Then, if you don't already have one, start building an emergency fund. Even having just like 1 to 3 months of essential expenses saved up can give you a lot more breathing room if things start to go sideways. It's also a good idea to keep some cash on hand, because if banks close or ATMs go down even temporarily, you don't want to be stuck without a way to buy food or fuel. And for this, small bills are best. Like, you don't want to be the idiot trying to buy a loaf of bread with a $100 bill and just hoping the cashier or the random guy you're buying it from has change, because they might not. Then some folks like to diversify into things like physical gold, silver, or barter items, and that's a personal decision, but the main idea is this: you don't want to put all of your trust in digital dollars, especially in a world where policy decisions or a cyber attack could make them disappear. But one of the best ways to prepare for shortages and price increases is to stockpile essential items now while they're still available and only slightly grotesquely overpriced. Food's probably the most obvious thing that people think of, and well, it's also kind of one of the most important. And for this, you want to focus on shelf-stable items like canned meat, vegetables, fruit, along with dry beans, rice, and pasta. Those are going to be a lot more cost-effective than trying to buy like huge pallets of MREs, especially if you want to have a couple of months worth or more of food on hand. Then if you have a larger budget, you can always invest in some freeze-dried foods or even pick up a home freeze jar. That'd be pretty cool. Then water's just as important as food, and there's lots of ways that you can store it just depending on what your budget can handle. You also want to have ways to purify water, because water utilities are vulnerable to things like cyber attacks and physical damage. And if something goes wrong, then you're going to be glad that you can treat your water at home, whether that's using like a Berkey style gravity filter, something portable like a Grail, or even just a rocket stove and a steel stock pot. Then after that, medical supplies are another big one. That includes first aid kits, bandages, antiseptics, over-the-counter meds, and if you can, spare prescriptions. Then something that a lot of people overlook is sanitation, but having a plan for that can make a big difference when you're trying to stay healthy in a bad situation. Toilet paper, soap, trash bags, bleach, sanitizing wipes, and hand sanitizer are all good to have, because if the water stops flowing, you're going to need ways to stay clean and deal with waste safely. Another important area to consider is fuel and energy. If you have gas cans, keep them rotated and topped off, and the same goes for propane tanks. If you're running a generator or propane stove, make sure that you have enough fuel on hand to keep things going for an extended outage. And for longer term situations, solar generators, power banks, rechargeable batteries, and even power tool batteries with USB adapters can help keep things like phones and other small items running when the grid goes down. And you also want to have some backup lighting and communication methods, things like LED lanterns, flashlights, and headlamps. They're all good to have, along with emergency radios that can be recharged using a crank or solar power. Then even simple things like lighters, fire starters, and matches can make your life a lot easier if things start to break down. But when you're stocking up, try to think in terms of redundancy. Like, don't have just one way to do something. You want to have backups. And what's nice about having these is that you'll be able to use them in more than just a worst case World War III type of situation. Those are the kind of items that are helpful during blackout, storms, supply chain issues, and even personal emergencies like job loss. So they really are practical things to have around. Now, when most people think of war, they usually imagine it happening over there. But the truth is that in a modern global conflict, the battlefield may not stay overseas. Even though the chance of a land invasion of the continental United States is pretty low, we could still face things like missile strikes, industrial sabotage, or even accidents involving critical infrastructure. And if you live anywhere near like a military base, industrial area, railroad hub, or even just a major city, you could very well be in the danger zone, even if nothing ever gets officially declared. And that's where having some personal protective gear comes into play. And one of the most important pieces of that gear is a good quality gas mask that can protect you from airborne contaminants. Mira Safety recently sent me one of their EvakPak kits a while back, and it's a solid option if you're looking for a simple all-in-one solution to keep on hand for emergencies. Inside the kit, you'll get a high-quality CM6M gas mask, one MBC77SOF CBRN filter, which can remove all known biological, chemical, radiological, and nuclear contaminants, one VK530 for protection against smoke and carbon monoxide, some potassium iodide tablets, and a storage pouch to keep all of that in. And when it comes to something like this, people tend to think it would only be useful in an absolute worst-case scenario, like chemical warfare. But it could be useful in a lot of other situations as well. Train derailments and other industrial disasters can release some pretty nasty stuff into the air, and a setup like this would protect you from breathing all that in while you're evacuating. You could also use this if there are wildfires in your area, since the VK530 filter is specifically designed to remove smoke. Then if there's a nuclear exchange or even just an accident at a nearby nuclear power plant, the potassium iodide tablets included in the kit can help reduce the risk of thyroid cancer if you're exposed to certain types of radioactive materials. You want to be able to take those as soon as possible after exposure, and you're probably not going to be able to just run into a gas station and pick up a bottle of these whenever you need them. But you only want to use those, of course, when you're instructed to do so by health authorities, or if there's clear evidence that something has gone down. But one thing that I really like about this EvakPak is that it comes as a complete setup. You're not having to buy the mask and filter separately and hope that you get the right stuff. You get everything in one pouch, and it's easy to grab and go. So if you're looking to add a protective gear option to your preps, whether it's for war, wildfires, or chemical hazards, then be sure to check this out. They also have some other kits with different masks and filter configurations, and I'll leave a link down in the description below where you can learn more about those different kits and pick one up if you want to. But I think having something like this on hand is a smart move, especially if you live in a high-risk area. It's one of those things that you just feel better having around. Now, if World War III does go nuclear, even on a small scale, radiation is going to become a real concern. And while it's easy to assume that that kind of threat only applies to people living near like missile silos or major cities, the truth is that fallout can travel hundreds of miles depending on wind and weather patterns. So even if you're not anywhere near the blast, you could still be in harm's way if radioactive material starts raining down in your area. That's why knowing how to shelter in place is so important. If a nuclear explosion happens and you have no way to evacuate before fallout arrives, the best thing that you can do is just stay inside, and the deeper inside the better. Ideally, you want to get to the lowest level of your home, like a basement if you have one, and put as much dense material between you and the outside as possible. Concrete walls, dirt, and even heavy furniture or water containers can help block radiation. If you don't have a basement, go for the most interior room of your home, avoid windows, and seal up any exterior doors with plastic sheeting and duct tape. Fallout dust can be very dangerous if you breathe it in, so keeping it out of your living space is absolutely critical. And radiation exposure works on what's called the time, distance, and shielding principle. And how that works is, first of all, the less time that you spend exposed to radiation, the better off you are. Second, the more distance you can put between yourself and the fallout, the better off you are. And third, the more shielding you have, like concrete, dirt, and even books, the better. And Even if you are able to reach some pretty effective shelter, it's still a good idea to have some potassium iodide tablets on hand. Those can help reduce the risk of thyroid cancer by saturating your thyroid with stable iodine so that it cannot absorb radioactive iodine 131. But once again, only take those if public officials advise it, or if there's strong evidence that something nuclear has happened. But also keep in mind that radioactive iodine isn't the only thing that'll be in the air. Other radioactive materials will be released that potassium iodide won't provide any protection against. So still do everything you can to stay as far away from any contamination as possible. It's also a good idea to have some basic radiation detection gear. Like, there are affordable Geiger counters and dosimeters out there, and while they're not like professional grade, they can help you make smarter decisions about when it's safe to leave your shelter. And this is another area where having food, water, lighting, sanitation supplies, and a way to stay updated on what's going on would be very beneficial, because in a fallout situation, you may need to shelter in place for several days or even a few weeks, so be sure to have all of your preps in place. Because if you have all your basics taken care of already, adapting them for a radiation plan really shouldn't be all that difficult. Another thing to think about when it comes to nuclear strikes is EMPs, or electromagnetic pulses. All nuclear explosions will cause an EMP, but those that occur high up in the atmosphere can damage electronics and electrical infrastructure over a very large area. This is something that the US government and military have been taking very seriously for decades, and if a major power wanted to cause mass disruption without flattening a city, then launching a high-altitude nuke over the country could do just that. No physical destruction, just the lights go out and then stay out for a really long time. So if you're relying on electronics for your preps, like radios, solar gear, or communication devices, you want to protect those items ahead of time. And the best way to do that is with a Faraday cage. We've talked about these a lot on this channel in the past, but Faraday cages are basically conductive containers that block electromagnetic fields. I've shown how to make them using a steel trash can, an ammo can, and even a box wrapped in several layers of aluminum foil. Then, of course, you can also pick up Faraday bags, but big ones that can protect multiple devices tend to be pretty expensive. It's also best to keep certain items in your Faraday cage when you're not using them, just to keep them safe. Those can include things like radios, small solar power stations, battery banks, flashlights and headlamps, external hard drives, and even older computers or cell phones. Now, you're obviously not going to be able to make calls or access the internet after an EMP, but those old electronics can still hold a ton of information on them. That can include everything from entire books to pictures and PDFs. And I'll be sure to link to one of my EMP or Faraday cage videos at the end of this video or in the description below. But one threat that's a lot more likely than nukes or even EMPs is cyber attacks, and these are already happening a lot more frequently than most people realize. Nation-state actors and criminal groups have been targeting our infrastructure, financial systems, and supply chain for years, and if we find ourselves in a global war, you can bet that those attacks are going to ramp up fast. They can cause widespread power outages, fuel pipeline shutdowns, banking disruptions, or internet outages, and the tricky part is that you don't even know what caused those outages or how long that they're going to last. A lot of y'all probably remember the AT&T blackout that happened a couple of years ago. That was supposedly caused by an error in coding, but a cyber attack could have done something very similar, or it could have been a lot worse. And if your cell phone or internet connection goes down, you'll still want a way to get news and stay in touch with others. Emergency radios are useful for this, and it's also a good idea to have some two-way communication gear on hand as well. FRS or GMRS radios are great for local use, like coordinating with your family members or neighbors. And if you're licensed or willing to study for it, then ham radios can give you even more range and flexibility, especially when other systems fail. But also don't overlook old school backup plans, like keep a physical copy of important information like addresses and emergency contacts on hand, because most of us rely on our phones for everything now, but if it dies or can't connect, you'll be glad that you have that sort of information written down. It's also a good idea to have some offline resources saved. That could be in the form of books, PDFs on an old device, printed manuals, or even laminated cheat sheets, because if you can't Google how to purify water or build a rocket stove with bricks, you'll want to have that info available in some other way. Now, if the economy poops the bed and cyber attacks are happening all the time, then there's a very good chance that we'll start to experience some pretty significant civil unrest. Depending on how bad things are in the world, that unrest could be as bad or even worse than what we saw in 2020. And if the fabric of our society starts to fray, we'll definitely need to take steps to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Start by securing your home. You can reinforce doors using extended strike plates, or at the very least, longer screws to replace your existing fasteners in those doors. Also, make sure that your windows are locked and covered up, especially at night, so people can't see what's inside. If you want to take things a step further, you could add shatter-resistant film to your windows, along with motion-activated security lighting. Then, having something you can defend yourself and your family with is important as well. That's something that I talk more about on my DIY Prepper Reloaded channel, so if that's a topic that you're interested in, then be sure to check that out as well. But aside from all the things that you can buy for security and defense, it's also important to have good habits to back those up. Like, try to keep as low of a profile as possible. Don't advertise your preps by bragging about how much food that you have stored. Loose lips sink ships and can also get your house broken into also. But that being said, it's also important to build relationships with people that you trust, because if things do start to go downhill, you're gonna need folks to watch your back. The lone wolf thing, it sounds cool, it looks good in movies, but most of the time it isn't really all that practical. And also do prepper basics like keep your gas tank at least half full and have good situational awareness. Having that situational awareness will help you steer clear of any problem areas and know when you may need to get out of somewhere, because many times the best way to win a fight is to not get into one to begin with. But even though outward physical threats are dangerous and get a lot of attention, many times threats from within can cause just as much damage. And because of all that, we need to put some effort into mental and emotional preparedness. Because even if nothing explodes near your house or your lights stay on and you've got a decent stockpile of supplies, the stress, fear, and uncertainty that comes with a global conflict can still mess with your head. The news will be nonstop. Social media will be even more of a dumpster fire than it already is. People around you may panic, spread rumors, or just shut down altogether. And if you're not careful, it's really easy to spiral into a dark place, especially if things drag on for weeks or months. However, there are some things that you can do to help you stay more grounded. First, limit your exposure to bad news. I'm not saying to ignore what's going on in the world, but don't keep the 24-hour news cycle running in the background all stinking day. That's just going to give you information overload and stress you out. Check in, see what's going on, and then go do something productive. Also, stick to a routine as much as possible. When things feel chaotic, having structure in your day can make a huge difference. So do things like eat regular meals, stay on a sleep schedule, and try to stay active, even if that's just doing some basic chores or projects around the house. Then try to keep yourself mentally busy. Read a book, play a game, fix something that's been broken for the last 6 months. I have a few of those. But just try to have things to do that'll help keep your brain from falling into panic mode. Then if you're someone who draws strength from your faith, then lean into that. Stay in contact with folks from your church, do devotionals, pray, and anything else that you find helpful. And staying connected to people you trust is useful for more than just like physical defense. Talking things out with family members or friends can be very helpful. Just knowing that you're not the only one going through stuff can help make bad situations a lot more bearable. And if you have kids at home, try to keep things as normal as possible for them. They don't need to be exposed to every single bad headline. Let them be kids, but also show them by example how to stay calm, prepared, and resilient. Because at the end of the day, your mindset is one of the most important things that you bring into a crisis. Fear is contagious, but so is calm. So do what you can now to build mental and emotional resilience. That way, when things go absolutely crazy, you're not just reacting, you'll know what to do. Now, if you want to see some upgrades that I made to my Faraday cage here recently, then you can click here. Or if you want to see things that you'd want to take care of after an EMP, many of which would also be good to do if a global conflict breaks out, then click here. Once again, I'd like to thank Mira Safety for sending us their EvakPak Survival Kit for us to take a look at today. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.